This week's episode of Naked Mormonism is brought to you by HelloFresh. Visit HelloFresh.com and enter promo code NAKED30 to get $30 off your first week of deliveries when you sign up.
This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where is the church going?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason, so if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But, most importantly,
May you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
skepticize everything.
Welcome to episode 72 of the Naked Mormonism Podcast, the serial Mormon history podcast. Today is Thursday, 12th of October, 2017. My name is Bryce Blankenagel, and thank you for joining me. On this episode, we dive right back into the historical timeline with talk on some detailed land purchase agreements. Joe and the Mormons were in a bad spot when they began settling Nauvoo, and land speculation was the new counterfeit money to hobble the church along with a falsely inflated economy. Land speculators never seem to pass on an opportunity to make some money off of the backs of destitute people, and Joe does the same when selling land to the Mormons, but actual specie exchange rarely happened. After that, we bring on Ethan Dodge, the second half of the Mormon Leaks team, to discuss the recent leaks leading up to conference weekend, as well as a little bit about himself. To cap it all off, I'm going to speak very briefly about Mythcon 2017 in Milwaukee. Let's get into it. I've been out of the office for quite some time, so there's really a lot to get to today in resuming our historical timeline and a bit of house cleaning afterwards. For the last two episodes, we suspended the timeline to have a couple of special episodes talking with some Mormon historians, as well as the bundles of energy that are Tom and Cecil of the Cognitive Dissonance podcast. So let's review where we're sitting in our timeline for some milk before we get into the meat today. Last historical timeline episode, we were catching up with the Quorum of the 12 Apostles on their mission through Europe. By the way, thanks to everybody who sent in corrections. There were not a few, but specifically thank you to Andrew and to Alice with Thames, not Thames, and Gloucestershire, not Gloucestershire, as I was so pained to try and pronounce. I always appreciate a little bit of help when it comes to, getting these old English terms or really any big or weird words that I don't have the foresight to Google when I'm preparing the show notes. So we read through a number of newspaper articles tracking the movements of the missionaries, as well as a letter that they sent back to the brethren in Nauvoo about some of their, sightseeing adventures. And that's where my horrible pronunciation came into play. After catching up with the quorum, we jumped into a little-known debate between a Mormon missionary and a skeptic who'd obviously read Eberhau's Mormonism Unveiled, who brought up some common criticisms of Mormonism and the Book of Mormon, which the Mormon missionary/apologist couldn't seem to answer. Interestingly enough, the criticisms that our skeptic brought up are the same criticisms skeptics bring up today when discussing the Book of Mormon, showing that there really are fundamental problems with the truth claims of Mormonism in the book. After the historical timeline, we had on Mike, who put together an armchair statistical assessment of Utah versus Norway to find out which is closest to getting voiped up to heaven due to perfect righteousness by Mormon standards. That fills our loins with enough milk to get us by. Let's partake of the meat.
As the scriptures say, they must have milk before meat.
Nauvoo was a hotbed for land speculators. The Mormons had a golden opportunity to turn Nauvoo into a sprawling metropolis with unrivaled access to the largest shipping river in the United States and realize an incredible potential to become the next biggest manufacturing center in the state of Illinois. Add into that the fact that Nauvoo was surrounded by fertile farmland to sustain the population, and a bunch of land speculators had Nauvoo slated as the next Chicago, with the massive influx of Mormon population, and a lot of people had a realistic optimism for the future of the city. For the sake of comparison, the population of Chicago on the 1840 census was just under 4,500 people, where Nauvoo ticked in at a cool 2,500. Nauvoo briefly surpassed Chicago in population with the influx of Mormon refugees, which climbed that population to around 12 to 15,000 by 1845. But by 1850, the next census after 1840, it put Nauvoo at only 1,200 inhabitants. That's less than 10% of its peak less than half a decade before. Those people who had high expectations of Nauvoo's trajectory weren't crazy to be optimistic when looking strictly at the population stats. Nauvoo and Chicago were duking it out for most populous city in Illinois during the first half of 1840. And with all the attractive attributes of the city, it was hard not to see things in a falsely positive light. So, what happened? Why did Chicago build at a steady rate, teeming at over 2.5 million people in the 2010 census, whereas Nauvoo sits at a barely sustainable 1,100 people today? How did one city become the central hub and the other fall away into obscurity as nothing more than a tourist destination for Mormon history geeks like myself? And there really is no single, simple answer to those questions. It's a multifaceted cascade of economic and social circumstances which caused Nauvoo's volatile single boom and bust in a single decade's time. The main reason the Mormons were driven from Missouri and forced to settle in Illinois and Iowa in the first place was due to their warlike solutions to Mormon poverty. When the Mormons couldn't afford to buy enough food to hunker down through the winter of 1838 to 39 in Missouri, they solved that problem by looting the Gentiles' property in the areas surrounding the Mormon settlements in Missouri. In the modern era, a group of people with enough resources to survive usually don't just go commit random burning and pillaging just for the hell of it. The Mormons needed food and supplies to survive, so they went and took them by force. The perpetual state of poverty Joe had run the Mormons and the church at large into wasn't an easy hole to dig themselves out of, and that state of poverty was a dark cloud overhanging the Mormons every moment during the first struggling years of the Nauvoo settlement. So the Mormons beginning their settlement efforts were already running in the red, and they constructed their settlements on top of an ever-growing mountain of debt. As much effort as any person devotes to building up a city's economy and manufacturing, there are always economic pressures that people can't control. I'm going to offer an example that I learned from a presentation at the John Whitmer Historical Conference, which really shed light on just how impotent the Mormons were in influencing the tides and forces of the larger nationwide economy, regardless of how much diligence and hope they put into building up Nauvoo as a central trading district. At the conference, a man named Mark Goodmanson presented on the land speculation in and around Nauvoo, and included some interesting information about Francis Scott Key's affiliation with the Mormons and land speculation as a renowned lawyer. Included in Mr. Goodmanson's presentation was an interesting little tidbit which really informed everybody on just how much people aren't in control of economics as much as they wish that they were. He talked a little bit about a town just south of Nauvoo called Warsaw, from which the Warsaw Signal, edited and published by Thomas Sharp, was distributed. Warsaw was a quaint little town with a booming economy right on the banks of the Mississippi. Warsaw's economy was great during the 1840s, and here's why. During the low river season, shipping boats on the Mississippi were forced to dock in Warsaw and unload their cargo, where they shipped it some 30 miles down the river overland, where the boat would then pick the cargo back up and continue their voyage up or down the river. During this low river season, the Mississippi was too shallow and the boats would be damaged if they didn't unload their cargo. So, during this season, Warsaw was the town where shippers and seamen would spend a few days sleeping, eating, and shopping, and doing all of the things that boost a town's economy, which was the lifeblood of Warsaw. And it created all of the jobs necessary to support these shippers and, of course, all of their bad habits. Goodmanson, during his presentation, went on to discuss the construction and completion of a canal which routed boats downriver during the low river season, making it so they didn't need to dock in Warsaw and unload their cargo and do all of those things necessary to keep Warsaw a booming little shipping town with tons of jobs. The canal completely starved out Warsaw, Illinois, and by the 1890s, jobs were very scarce, and the Warsaw economy was only barely self-sustaining. And there was no tourist appeal, there were no major factories, no major farming operations, or anything to keep Warsaw going. The point is, the completion of this canal to circumvent Warsaw was something unforeseen and out of control of the inhabitants of the city, but they suffered irreparable economic decline from it. Once those jobs to sustain Warsaw as a shipping port were gone, they weren't ever coming back. And the Mormons in Nauvoo were in a similar boat. You see what I did there? There were a number of economic factors out of their control which had profound impacts. One of the reasons Chicago gathered strength instead of Nauvoo when they were so closely competing for business and settlement was simply due to its location. I mean, think about it. Nauvoo was on the very edge of the western area inhabited by European settlers. Most of the land just a few miles west beyond Nauvoo was still First Nationer land, whereas Chicago was closer to the rest of the European major hubs, and it was easily accessible as a central trading hub on the banks of Lake Michigan, with quick access to every other major city located on the banks of any of the Great Lakes. That was a factor completely out of control of the Mormons, a problem to which they had no solution, and likely were probably ignorant of. Given this location and a number of other economic factors that served to be Nauvoo's fatal flaws that the Mormons didn't have control over, they had to make it as appealing as possible with the very few things that they could control. And the only thing they really had final say and near total control over was the land market. The Mormons had enough problem with counterfeit money crashing their local economy, so land speculation became the new trade option for bartering and making work happen. When Joe didn't have money to give somebody for a specific good or service, he would promise them land that he'd purchased on credit in payment for said good or service. This led to horrifically volatile land prices because Joe might pay one guy an acre for a couple bushels of corn, and another guy would be paid an acre for a few weeks' worth of working construction on the temple or for something affiliated with the church. There was no overseeing body or committee who were supposed to control the volatility, nor did anybody with an education or background in economics serve as advisor to the prophet. Joe was in control of everything and was trustee in trust of all church assets and monetary affairs. Very early into the Nauvoo years, Joe made an utter and complete mess of things, keeping terrible records, not recording his debts and assets with any reliable system, and having no standardized value for acreage. The thing is, Joe realized he was creating a mess of things, and at some point didn't want to be the church's money guy anymore. This is from Robert Flanders' Nauvoo, Kingdom on the Mississippi, beginning with page 121. Quote, "On June 18, 1840, the prophet asked the High Council to relieve him from his responsibility as chief land agent, because the burden was heavy and he needed more time for other activities. He rehearsed the necessity for the original purchase of the Hancock and Lee County lands, for which, quote, your memorialist had to become responsible for the payment of the same, and had to use considerable exertion in order to commence a settlement. Under the then existing circumstances, your memorialist had necessarily to engage in the temporalities of the church." And, quoting Joseph, now back to Flanders, "But the spiritual needs of the church were now pressing. He wanted to pursue his inspired revision of the Bible, and to translate some Egyptian parchments he considered of import. Furthermore, he wished to be free to, quote, wait upon the Lord for such revelations as may be suited to the conditions and circumstances of the church. And in order that he may be enabled to attend to those things, he prays your honorable body will relieve him from the anxiety and trouble necessarily attendant on business transactions by appointing someone to take charge of the city plot." End quote. Back to Flanders. "The High Council considered his request, but failed to do more than give him another salesman. The prophet responded with an irritated veto of the action. The council, though chastened, remained insistent that Smith not resign the temporal responsibilities, since no one else was willing or able to assume them. They were in perfect accord with the spirit and intent of his request. They thought it wise and appropriate that they would try to give him more help, but they said, quote, now out of the history of the church, as he is held responsible for the payment of the city plot and knowing no way to relieve him from the responsibility at present, we would respond of him to act as treasurer for the city plot, and to whom those persons whom we may appoint to make sales of lots and attend to the business affairs of the church may be at all times responsible. End quote. So by mid-1840, Joe knew just how much of a tangled web Nauvoo finances were, and he was trying to pass his own monetary problems off onto the High Council. They knew just as much as he did that nothing was in order, and all of the debts assumed by the church were essentially Joe's own debts in his own name, so most of them didn't want to get anywhere near the finances. Debt in Nauvoo was plutonium, and anyone who got anywhere near it would find their finances slowly decaying from its cancerous effects. But the problem was, nobody wasn't infected. Every single Mormon who settled in Nauvoo did so by buying land from Joe, which he'd purchased from people like White and Hotchkiss and Galland and a few others, and Joe just ended up passing that debt onto whomever purchased the land from him. This is how many congregations of people are built, but usually it's done successfully when there are controlling measures put in place for land values. But Joe had no control over the land market, even though he was the chief sole investor. To describe just how much of a mess Joe was making, please allow me to read another paragraph from Flanders' Nauvoo, Kingdom on the Mississippi. Essentially, Joe was making a ton of business transactions, but often wasn't worrying about all that bothersome paperwork to make things official. Just a gentleman's handshake agreement and maybe a signed bill of sale with the one true prophet was enough to allay most people's concerns. Quote, the prophet continued to purchase land. In October 1840, he bought 80 acres of farmland 12 miles south of the city for $2,000. In March 1842, he offered $2,000 for 20 acres in Nauvoo, yet unowned by the church. In March 1841, he purchased from his secretary, Robert Thompson, 50 lots in Nauvoo for $10,000. The following July, Thompson sold Emma Smith 123 acres in the south edge of Nauvoo for $4,000. Mrs. Smith might have been proxy or agent for her husband in this transaction. To what extent Smith was acting as a private entrepreneur in these purchases, it is impossible to know. At least, at first, he considered his fortunes intimately connected with those of the church. The device of trustee was only a necessary legal convention. The county records are not a reliable guide to the extent of his dealings. Many transactions were not recorded there until after his death, and many were never recorded there at all. End quote. Joe always had a hard time keeping church and secular matters separated, and some would argue that he actively intermingled the two even when doing so was not in his best interest. When it came to land speculation, the status of prophet was about the only thing that lent any credit to Joe. Otherwise, he was just a dude who never paid his debts. If not for his status as prophet, the people making deals with him likely would have been slightly more skeptical and may not have extended tens of thousands of dollars of credit to him. But because Joe had no sense for economics and wasn't a good deal maker, his agreements to purchase land at exorbitant prices drove the land prices to incredibly high levels. Try to think of this in terms of stock with simple math. If a company exists with 500 shares owned by 100 people and one person decides they want to buy up all of the shares, the price of the stock is going to skyrocket, and anybody else trying to buy the stock is going to be priced out. Well, Nauvoo land was the physical stock owned by the church, and Joe was buying up all of the land he could in areas around Nauvoo, which created this massive inflation bubble. The White and Galland purchases were just a few of the largest contracts that Joe signed in acquiring land for the Saints. But the Hotchkiss and Gillett purchase really captured this problem of drastic inflation, which made buying land for the average Mormon completely impossible to be done with regular specie. So credit was extended to them by Joe, who was operating on nothing but credit. This is from page 42 of Flanders' Nauvoo book. Quote, "The Hotchkiss purchase was for Smith and the church the greatest business venture since the Kirtland Bank." That's the Kirtland Safety Society bank that created their own economy, their own counterfeit, and eventually deflated. Hotchkiss apparently knew a city when he saw one coming upon his property. Accordingly, the price was high, considering the approaching deflation and monetary stringency. The purchase was in the form of a land contract, the church to have possession of the property but not the deeds until the debt was paid. Apparently, no money was paid down, and the terms were entailed in a series of notes. 2 notes of $25,000, one maturing in 10 and one in 20 years, seem to have been the principal. There were 40 additional notes of $1,500 each, totaling $60,000, 2 of which were due every 12 months for 20 years. These were apparently the interest, 8% a year simple interest on $50,000. There were 2 additional notes of $1,250, one due in 5 years and the other in 10. So the church was to pay the Hotchkiss partners $3,000 each year for 20 years, plus $1,250 the 5th year and $26,250 the 10th year, and $25,000 the 20th year. Finally, an additional $2,000 was to be paid Hugh White, who owned a small interest in the property. The total amount was $114,500, and I calculated that out. That's about $3.03 million of debt that Smith went into to buy all of this land. And this is just the Hotchkiss and Gillett land purchase agreement. Smith subsequently claimed that Hotchkiss had agreed verbally that no interest was to be charged, but the contracts do not suggest any such agreement. The obligations of the Hotchkiss purchase forced Smith and the church into the real estate business on a large scale and determined that city plots in Nauvoo would not be inexpensive. End quote. Just for some added context, at this time, the average price for land was between $2.50 to about $13 per acre nationwide. And I bolstered that claim with a 1957 study on census.gov, which put the average price of improved land at $11 an acre. The price varied widely depending on geography and a few other factors, including how improved the land was and how close it was to major trading hubs. But Commerce was an uninhabited swampland when the Mormons purchased it, and it was nearly 150 miles from the next large trading hub. That was Springfield, Illinois. And that means that the land prices there were probably fetching a fair market value on the low end of that scale, from $2.50 to $13. So let's be generous. Let's say that a fair market value without the influx of the Mormons would be maybe $5 to $7 per acre. So if we calculate that out with the Hotchkiss purchase, the divinely inspired prophet Joseph Smith agreed to pay around $229 per acre. That means he paid around 32 times the expected market value at the most generous estimates. Let's take that a step further. If we are even more generous, and we say that Nauvoo land prices were fetching the same prices as like improved land in New York City, some of the highest valued land. Let's just say that they were hitting that $13 per acre or something. Joe still paid over 20 times the fair market value of improved land for the Hotchkiss purchase. And it was swampland. That's the craziest part about all of this. And maybe the worst part is Joe was just a middleman in everything that happened here. He just put his name on all of the contracts. The real suffering from this criminal level of land speculation was shouldered by the Mormons themselves, who were buying the land from Joe at these exorbitant prices. Joe couldn't sell the land to the Mormon refugees at the nationwide market value because Joe would be shouldering huge losses, and he wouldn't be able to fulfill the signed contracts with Hotchkiss, Gillett, Galland, White, all of these large contracts. But none of the Mormons could afford these prices. It just couldn't be done. Nobody had enough money to buy the land. So that's where Joe used the land to buy labor and goods from the settling Mormons, or for the settling Mormons. You gave the prophet some food or some livestock, or you helped him build a few houses. then he gave you a small plot of land. And by doing so, Joe went even further into debt as he was giving these assets away with no cash in hand exchanged. This business method of chaos and pandemonium was short-sighted at best and vindictive at worst. The desperate situation of the Mormons drew in the worst people with intentions of making money regardless of the consequences. The Mormons were not only vulnerable prey to these kinds of people, these land shark and land speculators, they were led by one of them. And yeah, I guess there's nothing like a little bit of human suffering to bring out the worst in people, right? But really, think about this. What was the alternative? White, Galland, Hotchkiss, Gillett, and all of these land speculators did reprehensible things capitalizing on the Mormons' desperation and suffering, and Joe was just as deplorable for doing the same, but at least Joe's actions are excusable because he was just as desperate as each and every Mormon without a home. Joe made rash decisions without any foresight in an effort to save the Mormon population. But that was desperation, not altruism, which is perfectly captured when we see Joe doing stuff like this from page 120 of Flanders' book. Quote, Smith's most extensive holdings were in the neighborhood of his own residence, near the riverbank at the corner of Main and Water Streets on the south side of the flat. His general merchandise store, which also housed his office, was nearby, as well as the Nauvoo House Hotel, the Times and Seasons office, the houses of several apostles, and, in 1843, his Nauvoo Mansion Hotel. Lots in the area were in demand, and it was the earliest and most completely developed part of the lower town. On the south, said an observer late in 1841, the lots are mostly taken, and a great share of the improvements seem to be bestowed on this part of the city. End quote. What that means is Joe improved the area around his own house on Water Street very first. If he really was the altruistic prophet for the people that he claimed to be, he would be living in a shack until every other Mormon had a brick home. But he did the exact opposite. He was an oligarch. He was a nobleman of the town. And he knew what was going on here. He knew that he was speculating on land values, and the people knew it just as much as him. I mean, they didn't know the details of the land business deals that he was making, but they had to understand that speculation was driving up land values. These business deals may have been sold as divine providence, but anybody with a brain in their skull knew that Joe was speculating on land, and these land speculators from which he was purchasing the land were largely setting Nauvoo's economic trajectory onto a disaster path. Here's a quote from later on in Flanders' book. Quote, There were strong feelings in the church against speculators and speculation, a common American antagonism heightened in the case of the Mormons because so many had been hurt by the bursting of the Kirtland bubble. Yet it is impossible to conceive of the Nauvoo land business as being free of speculation. Nauvoo was, by definition, a speculation. If not for private, then for community gain. Professional speculators would have slipped past armed patrols to reach Nauvoo. Attracted by its spectacular growth, many of these professional speculators joined the church, and some were accorded the land as profiting the common good. Now quoting Joseph from the History of the Church, quote, Suppose I sell some land for $10 an acre, and I gave $3, $4, or $5 per acre. Then some persons may cry out, You are speculating. Yes, I will tell them, I buy other lands and give them to the widow and the fatherless. If the speculators run against me, they run against the buckles of Jehovah. End quote. I mean, that last little bit, that was from Joe himself. That's volume 5 of the History of the Church. We can harbor no illusions that the Mormons didn't know how this land came into their possession. Flanders makes a good case for Nauvoo itself being nothing but speculation, coupled with the fact that the town didn't have any appeal other than its own rapid, population growth. Nauvoo was an inflating bubble set to implode upon the Mormons in a much more spectacular and cataclysmic fashion than anything that happened with the Kirtland Safety Society anti-banking company. It's really fascinating. And I think that quote really captures Joseph's intermingling of church and state. He said it himself. If I sell you land at $10 an acre that I paid $3, $4, or $5, I'm excused because if speculators run against me, they run against the buckles of Jehovah. It was sold as divine providence when it was clearly just Joseph buying and selling land and trying to make money off of the Mormons. I was recently watching a few lectures given by Susan Easton Black at BYU about Joseph Smith and the history of the church. For those of you who haven't heard the name Susan Black before, she is a prominent Mormon historian, Joseph Smith apologist. She wrote Who's Who in the Doctrine and Covenants, the 4 different 400 questions books, Finding Christ Through the Book of Mormon, and over 100 other publications published by the church-owned propaganda company Deseret Book. And she used to be a BYU professor before retiring to serve a mission in the Nauvoo temple, where I believe she still resides. Or at least that was the last updated information I could find on her without diving too deep. Anyway, I would recommend watching a video or two of her lectures. There's a few in the show notes, should it tickle your fancy, if you want to chase that down. But my point is, if you know Mormon history, you'll notice that she tends to leave out the majority of actual church history, which puts things into context. When we had cognitive dissonance on last episode, Cecil asked how many Mormons know some of the stuff that we talked about with Joseph Smith, and my answer was almost none. You wonder why that is? It's because people like Susan Easton Black and Rod Meldrum know the real history of the church and are only telling parts of it which could be spun to show the Mormons and Joseph as victims of religious persecution. In these lectures, Black hits on the high points of church history: Joe's Leg Operation, the Kirtland Temple, the Kirtland Safety Society Company, the Exodus to Missouri, Haun's Mill Massacre, Exodus to Illinois, the Carthage Martyrdom, but every single one of those points requires hours of unpacking and getting lost in the weeds of church history to truly understand. And she ends up chalking everything up to religious persecution. When I see the saints going through these various trials and tribulations, the religion of Mormonism is such a fleeting aspect of everything that happened to the Mormons. There's a naturalistic and material explanation for everything the Mormons suffered. Joseph Smith wasn't a prophet. He was just a dude looking out for his own dude self-interests. Anyone who tries to sell what the Mormons experienced as wholly religious persecution is either ignorant or dishonest, and real historians should have no use for this vacuous nonsense. Normally, a dude just like Joe just doing his dude thing isn't a problem for anybody but the few people around him, but Joe was a massively public figure with one of the largest single religious followings in America at the time, and everything he did in the 1840s affected thousands of people directly and tens of thousands indirectly. And these terrible business deals are only one overturned car among a decade-and-a-half long train wreck of terrible mistakes and ruin left in Joseph Smith's wake. Anytime we find historians painting a perfect picture of the Joseph Smith the prophet, removing smudges and blemishes on his history, they are harming honest discourse and damning a fruitful and academic conversation before it starts. We need to call these people what they are: apologists. We can examine Mormon history without the chocolate-striped colored glasses. Time for a quick word from this week's sponsor, HelloFresh. I'm going to share a little story with you guys. A little while back, I told you that we're going to look into start doing some ads. Well, given my neurotic nature to vet what I say in the show before it goes to air, it's taken some time to find a product that I feel comfortable endorsing and advertising for. This week, I want to tell you about HelloFresh. 2 nights ago, I was editing some audio for another project that I'm working on, and my headphones, of course, don't allow for any noise from the outside to come in. Unbeknownst to me, there was a knock at the door that I didn't hear. The next morning, as I'm sending Annie out the door with her lunchbox in hand, we open the door and find the HelloFresh package awaiting our investigation. And here I thought, it's been sitting outside all night. I wonder if the food is still okay. So I brought it inside and I opened up the box, and lo and behold, thanks to HelloFresh's recyclable insulated smart packaging, it was colder inside the box than it was in my fridge, and all of the food was just as fresh as could be. So last night, we chose the cherry drizzled pork chops for our first meal, and I have to say, it was an incredibly unique blend of sweet and savory with grape tomatoes, lemon, shallots, cherries, and cherry jam, and all kinds of other delicious and healthy ingredients. It took us about 10 minutes to prep, barely half an hour to cook, and with a little bit of cooling, we were eating a real home-cooked meal in 45 minutes with a recipe and combination of flavors we'd never tried before. All the ingredients were packaged in perfect portions, so there was no extra or food waste, which is always a problem in our house. You know, we always buy an entire head of parsley when all we need is just a little bit to dress up a meal, and then the rest eventually goes bad. HelloFresh is forging a new path of sustainable farm-to-box meals with no food waste and exactly the ingredients you need to get off the couch and into the kitchen by simply going to HelloFresh.com and signing up for one of their meal plans. Each week, their staff of dietitians and foodies create delicious new recipes with step-by-step instructions designed to take less than 45 minutes from prep to eat, and it fosters that home-cooked feeling of the cooking experience so you can focus on the fun of food preparation just as much as the deliciousness of the end result. They offer classic, vegetarian, and family boxes for 2 to 4 people, and you choose what nights you get deliveries with their useful online service. They've even begun incorporating light summer meals and breakfast options to cover all of your food-related bases. You'll pay less than $10 a meal, and if you enter promo code NAKED30, you'll get $30 off your first week of meal delivery service. But HelloFresh is so much more than just food. They offer a plethora of unique kitchen utensils and perfect pairing wines that can be shipped right to your door with your week's delivery of food. If you've heard HelloFresh advertised on other podcasts, it's because they're a really good company with high-quality food, uninterruptible service, and they received an excellent rating on Consumer Reports for everything I've just told you about. Stop waiting to sign up and just go for it. Just pull the trigger. I promise it'll make your life easier, and it'll reduce those pesky trips to the grocery store as well as containers full of rotting food that you never end up using. Go to HelloFresh.com and use promo code NAKED30. You know, I've heard ads for HelloFresh before, but I never tried it until now, and frankly, I'm sad that I waited this long. Join this growing movement of foodies getting perfect portions of great-tasting recipes delivered straight to our door for way cheaper than eating out. Don't be like me and wait for so long to sign up, because this promo code probably won't expire, but all that extra food in your fridge that you never use will. Once again, that's HelloFresh.com, promo code NAKED30. HelloFresh, HelloFresh.com, promo code NAKED30. And now, let's get into the Mormon Leaks Minute.
I'm Ryan McKnight, and welcome to the Mormon Leaks Minute.
So many answers and assurances can come through daily searching and studying the scriptures, and with sincere and pleading prayer. But there are no such promises on the internet.
Today's Mormon Leaks Minute is very special. As you heard Ryan introduce the segment, but we actually have the other half of Mormon Leaks organization on the line with us today. Ethan, who has recently been outed or has outed himself from his moniker of Privacy P. Pratt. Ethan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, Bryce.
No, the pleasure's all mine. I'm really excited to be talking to you because I have to admit, at Sunstone, when you guys were remoting in and you were on the voice masker, it was a little clandestine and creepy. So it's nice to actually put a person to the Privacy P. Pratt.
Yeah, that wasn't the first time we'd done that. Actually, I went on Infants on Thrones when we originally launched, and we did the same thing.
All right. So I want to ask you, we have a lot to talk about today. Let's dive right in. Before we get to talking about some leaks, because you guys have just done a massive dump in preparation for conference. As we are recording it, is the final day of General Conference of 2017, October here. But we're going to get on to some of the leaks that you guys have released this past week. But first, I want to ask you a couple of questions. Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
Ethan, why use the wall? Why use Privacy P. Pratt as a shielding when you eventually came out? I mean, had you planned all along to eventually reveal your identity, or was there some sort of sequence of events that led you to being outed, or kind of walk us through it a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I kind of touch on it in my blog post where I originally came out. And that I list 3 reasons there. And the number one reason is that somebody close to me works for the church, right? And I was doing it mostly for their protection, did not want them to be suspected of any participation in the project, right? But on top of that, there was also some worries about my career on the potential adverse effects that it could have, because I work in the cybersecurity industry. I'm paid to protect and keep information confidential, right? And so I wanted to consult some trusted colleagues in my field on their opinion on whether or not this would have adverse effects on it. And then also there's always ex-Mormons always have the anxiety of coming out as ex-Mormon to their TBM families. And I had already done that. My family already knew that I was out. But if they knew that I was participating in Mormon Leaks, it would have been magnitudes worse, right? So, okay. Kind of waited to ease the storm there, and then the other 2 things it just got to a point where I felt that the benefits definitely outweighed the costs. As far as my career, I did talk to trusted colleagues, and it was pretty much unanimous that there was going to be very minimal adverse effect on my career, and in most cases, it would actually bolster my resume. So
interesting. Well, because if this is a field that you're working in protecting people's information and identities, and this is something that you're doing as a side project and have done so successfully up to this point for quite some time, I think that does speak volumes to your not only your ethic, but as well to your ability, technical ability to do these things. And obviously, you guys, Mormon Leaks as a foundation, as an organization, does, let's just say, notoriously keep their process behind bars. You guys don't tell us how you vet these documents, which I understand is it can be taken as a bit hypocritical when your entire mission statement is committed to transparency and trying to get the church to be more transparent, yet you guys refuse to be transparent on how you're able to vet these documents. So I can see a bit of a dichotomous nature in this, in the kind of the organization's mission statement and business model. However, I do understand the necessity for it because this is a powerful organization and it has a lot of control over people's lives. And if they were to be found out that they were leaking specific documents, it could possibly mean the end of their careers or their family life, or, everything that you were afraid of and why you kept yourself behind a moniker to begin with.
Precisely. Yeah.
So I want to also ask you, you recently did an AMA on Reddit, and of course I will link that up in the show notes as well as to the blog where you came out in the first place. But I want to ask you just kind of on a personal level, and, feel free to just share what you would like to, or not share anything if you would not like to. But do you mind walking us through kind of a point by point how you came to do what you do, and, a little bit of your walk through Mormonism?
Yeah, specifically what I do with Mormon Leaks, or in my career, or...
Yeah, I mean, you weren't just a TBM and one day woke up and said, I'm going to do everything I can to expose the church's fraud. So, right. Obviously there was some kind of process involved, right?
Yeah, so let's see, where do I start? I was pretty TBM. I've actually have started chronicling my story via a podcast in which I'm going chronologically through my life. The podcast is specifically meant for a Nevermo, right? But okay. It's been fun. Yeah, it's been fun.
Feel free to plug that as well if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's called My Mormon Experience. You could listen to it anywhere on wherever you get your podcasts, and if you're more into reading it actually started out as a blog series that I turned into a podcast, and you could find that at egd.io/my-mormon-experience, right?
Awesome.
And it's been interesting going through my life and kind of seeing, like, with hindsight, now that I'm out, I can see the total, like, thought policing that the church did, the shaming, right, the guilt trips and whatnot, and it blows my mind that I didn't catch it sooner. And it's somewhat embarrassing, but then I remember millions of other people do it too, right?
Right,
So,
exactly.
But to answer your question more pointedly, so my mother actually left the church before me, and that was really difficult on me, especially because when I was 18, I was a musician, and all through high school and college, I was in and out of bands and playing in the Provo music scene, actually. That was a lot of fun, and I didn't want to go on a mission. I wanted to go be a rock star, right? And so to take the guilt away from not wanting to go on a mission, I decided that I wasn't going to go to church anymore. And yeah, so I told my parents that I wasn't going to go on a mission and that I wasn't going to go to church anymore. I had started exploring different beliefs. However, this completely happened without any knowledge of the church's whitewashed version of history, right? To some extent, I mean, I did come to find out that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, and actually on my mission, I had a companion that taught that he was not a polygamist, and I corrected him, right?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, but my motives the first time trying to leave were definitely not because I had felt betrayed by the church, right?
Okay.
And a big part of the reason why I decided to go on a mission is because I saw how hurt my mom was about it, and I honestly don't blame my mom at all for this, because she was I don't want to use the term brainwashed because we all know it's super strong, but it's what it is. And she was upset that I wasn't going to go on a mission because that's what all good Mormon boys do, right?
Of course.
And so I decided to go on a mission. Now, when I say that, I didn't go on a mission because of my mom. I want to make that clear. I made the decision for myself to go on a mission. However, my mom and other friends and family were huge, tremendous factors at play in that decision. So when my mom left the church several years after I got home from my mission, it hurt quite a bit because she was such a huge factor in me not leaving the church and going on a mission, right?
Okay.
So I let's see. With my mom leaving, it kind of gave me permission to start looking at why she left and why she would want to leave. And by this time, I was aware of some of the. I did have nuanced views. I mean, by this time, I was actually pretty openly critical about the church on some things, like specifically Proposition 8 in 2008. Right?
Yeah, of course.
I was not afraid to voice my opinion and my disagreement with them on subjects like that. At this point, I guess you could say I was fairly progressive and nuanced. However, I was still very much TBM. I still believed that the church was the only way to get to heaven, and that it was the only true church, and whatnot. But then the essays had already been out for a little bit, but started reading those, and those, I guess you could say they were the gateway into the rest of my apostasy.
Well, because they just give you a tiny bit of milk, and then you're forced to go to other sources to dig into the meat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They address the issue, but they sidestep details, which really bothers me, right?
Yeah, I mean, several months before her 15th birthday, that makes it okay.
Yeah, yep, that makes it just okay.
Awesome.
So yeah, I started reading other books. Namely, one that did wonders for me was actually American Crucifixion. I'm blanking on the author on that one. It's a great book. It made me realize that if Joseph Smith was my mayor or my governor, that like presently I would be out there protesting him too, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that MormonThink.com was tremendous in helping me see the alterations that the church had done, and ultimately, actually, so that it kept piling up and piling up. You know, the books on my shelf. I've been going to therapy since I left the church. I say that in my blog article, and I definitely had my fair bit of shaming done to me in my childhood from church leaders, from other authority figures, right? And I don't talk about them a lot for their own privacy, but I do have children, and sorry, I'm going to get emotional here, but I love them a lot. And they were the biggest reason why I left the church, because I did not want to have them go through what I went through.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that was by far my biggest shelf item, my kids, right?
Yeah. And when people say that even if the church isn't true, it's still a great way to raise a family, that's only if you toe the party line, right? If you happen to be, if you happen to differ somewhat, with something that the church teaches, then it's not quite so friendly to the family model.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you said. And in fact, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think some people can make it work. I think that there can be room for like a lot of nuance, and even people that don't necessarily believe in the gospel, but there will still be a place for them at church.
Okay.
I just honestly don't see anything like that happening on a wide scale within my lifetime. And it's not, for me, it's not worth the effort. I'm honestly much, much, much happier outside of the church.
I'm glad to hear that. And it's, you said yourself earlier that, you're going to therapy as well. So, I mean, obviously, a significant number of people, who are very mentally healthy go to therapy, and they are mentally healthy because they go to therapy. So it sounds like you're in a much better place now than you were, I mean, let's say right before you went on your mission, or maybe right after. So I'm really glad to hear that you've kind of had this evolution out of, what you call brainwashing, which I think is the perfect word for it, because it is a powerful, way to shape a young mind from the very earliest ages of the child's reasoning. And, I'll just say, I'm glad that you, have decided that it's a bad idea to raise your kids up in this brainwashing type of culture.
Yeah. In fact, I touch on the first chapter in my Mormon experience. It's the chapter title is called Indoctrination, and I point out that children start attending from 3 years old, and they start singing songs like, I can't wait until I'm 8 so I can be baptized, and I hope they call me on a mission, right? It starts very early.
And even before that, they're trying to say family prayers, and their parents are guiding them through prayers over meals and whatnot. So it's from a very early age. It's taught long before any critical thinking skills are taught. So,
Yep.
So I'm hoping to have you on for future segments of Mormon Leaks, but we have a lot to get to today because you guys just did the massive dump before conference, and I obviously there's way too much for us to cover. So what I did is I said, Ethan, can you just distill your 3 favorite leaks, and we'll talk about those very briefly. So what are you bringing to us today, Ethan?
Yeah, so I guess I'll go in order of. So I mean, like you said, there was so much. There's so many good things. I love the conversations that happen around the leaks on Reddit and Facebook and whatnot.
So do I.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to see other people's opinions about what we're releasing, and it's fun to see other people draw conclusions about the implications of what we're releasing. I mean, that's ultimately our goal, right? We do not editorialize. Yeah, exactly. We do not editorialize on purpose, right? And that is not what we're here to do. We're here to get the information out there and let other people draw their own conclusions. I'm going to start with the church attendance Excel spreadsheet that got that got released, and solely because I thought it was so funny that the subject of the email that it came through was, "Please delete the graphs file. I should not have sent it to you. Thank you."
Yeah.
Right. And it ended up coming to us because that person did send it. So I think my favorite comment on Reddit was like, my favorite comment on Reddit about it was, "Damn it, Peggy, you had one job."
Perfect. That's exactly it. Burn after reading.
Yeah.
Okay, so walk us through what can we tease out of this spreadsheet that's provided?
Yeah, so I'll be 100% honest, and I haven't done a ton of analysis on it myself. However, there have been people that have been able to look at the data much more extensively than I have. But pretty much this shows that the church is holding tight holding very close to the chest their attendance numbers. They
course.
boast the 15 million something members at every conference, right? Or I guess not every conference, but whenever they do the statistical report. But yet they never go into detail about activity, right? They never go into detail about how many of them are tithe payers, stuff like that, right? And this document does not go into detail about tithe payers, but it does go into detail about attendance across different demographics and whatnot. And it's very obvious what we knew for a long time, that they keep these numbers close. And with the data that we have, we are able to estimate. These numbers are not representative of the entire church, right? But we are able to estimate the attendance numbers of the entire church. So,
all right, so I'm actually just going to link that Reddit thread into the show notes, and if anyone is interested in seeing how the conversation has been played out there, you can definitely check out that link. So, what is the next leak that we're going to take a look at today, Ethan?
Yeah, so my next one, so this one, we actually almost released this one about a month ago. I don't know how Ryan's going to feel about me saying that, but I just said it. Okay. And it's the PowerPoints. There were, let's see, I believe there were 4 of them that we released, and this came out on Tuesday. And actually, we were originally going to release the gender equality one that we released on last Saturday before the women's session. We were going to release that one with it as well, but we decided to hold off on these ones because I personally really liked them. Okay. I kind of have an affinity for church PowerPoints ever since they issued that DMCA takedown for that bubble chart one.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, so the topics of the 4 that we released on Tuesday are called the New Gospel Topics articles on LDS.org that deal with challenging information. That's one of them. Another one is titled Effects of the Lowered Missionary Age, which is very deceiving because it actually does not. They must have been testing the lowered missionary age at this time because it doesn't actually address the effects of it since they've lowered the missionary age.
I wonder if that's something that it's hard to tease the statistics out unless, the policy has been in place for, at least 5 or 10 years. That's something that's hard to quantify so early since the policy change was made.
Yeah. So I served my mission from 2009 to 2011, and I actually had a mission companion that was one of the test subjects in it, and he started serving his mission at 18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then I want to say it was 2013. Don't quote me on this, but sometime shortly after my mission, they announced the change.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Then the third one is called Mid-Single Adults and Single Adult Units. That's from March 2013, and it again, people were there are attendance statistics here, and people were able to glean estimates on total church attendance. Again, we have no hard numbers, but this does all the data that we can get helps us know better the outcome of our data, right? Better our estimates.
And unfortunately, the church is incredibly stringent with what the statistics that they release. That was always one of my favorite talks during General Conference was when they do the church review and they go through the various statistics, the numbers of stake, branches, total membership, so on and so forth. And they don't really let us in on a whole lot of statistics that are really relevant, like their retention numbers, their tithing numbers, the numbers of stakes and wards that have closed or been combined because of lack of membership. And the only way that we can paint a better picture of what the membership looks like on the back end is by gathering together as many of these statistics as we possibly can and hopefully quantifying them once we have enough of these leaks that we can put together a more colorful picture of what the attendance actually looks like.
Yeah, and I love what you just said that with the as we get more of these leaks that eventually we will be able to paint a more whole picture. We often get complaints that our leaks are underwhelming, which is funny because we've never claimed to release overwhelming leaks, right?
Right.
But our intention is exactly that: is to get enough data out there that eventually we can derive some conclusive evidence, some conclusive estimates and data and whatnot about, so that we can fairly paint how the church is deceiving people or is not deceiving people. I mean, I believe in many cases they're not, right? So
right, and if the stats do play out that they are being fairly transparent, they're just not sharing all of the statistics, that indeed their membership is at 15 million members that are active and full attending and full tithe payers, then so be it. That's just where the facts lead us. But we want to know whether that's the truth or whether those statistics are inflated in some aspects. We just want to get closer to the truth, whatever that leads us to.
Yeah, and then the last one of those PowerPoints this is actually my favorite one. It says life outcomes of male graduates ages 46 to 58 from BYU and other universities.
Yeah.
And this one is my favorite just because, I mean, I love the phrase that BYU is the Mormon Harvard, right? I've heard some I've heard like horror stories of people like they were like attending Cornell and they like felt the spirit that they had to go to BYU, so they transferred to BYU, and I'm like, what the hell were you thinking?
Yeah, terrible idea.
Yeah. Anyway, I love it too because, I love it and I hate this aspect of it is that they're only concentrating on the male graduates, right? It just reiterates that how women are supposed to be in the home. They're not supposed to have a career. The church is really, really wants to get their men out there to represent them in the world and in the workforce, right? And
these statistics are playing out for the people that are slated to be the next generation of leaders, right? They're not looking at the millennial graduation rates. They are looking at the ages from, what you said, 45 to 50, basically. That's going to be the next generation of Quorum of the 70s and 12.
Yep, you're exactly right. And, yeah, it's I'm particularly passionate about this topic because I have seen firsthand how the church's rhetoric around women has hurt women, and
definitely
it's sickening to me. So,
and it plays out in just the statistics as well. If listeners go back a couple weeks when I had Mike on to talk about the comparison between Norway's statistics versus Utah's statistics. Obviously, they're not a perfect comparison, but the rate of women that are that we would expect to be working is it is far and away. It's really terrible to see that less than half of the women that are of working and socioeconomic status that we expect to be working in Norway, about half of the same amount of women are working in Utah. So there's something to those statistics. And obviously, if women are taught their entire lives that they need to, that their degree is just a fallback in case their husband can't completely, provide food and water or food and shelter for their family, then, obviously that plays out in seeing lower graduation rates and further misogyny, basically, further disparaging of women in broader society. So I thoroughly agree with you on that, Ethan.
Yeah, and it's terrible too because as the women, like it's a vicious cycle because the women become dependent on their husbands, right?
Yep.
And then they because they're dependent, they don't feel this need to, or they don't feel the right that they don't feel that they have the right to go and get an education or turn their lives around. And then, I mean, when women leave the church, obviously this isn't a fair statement for all women that leave the church, but the majority that I have talked to are so disgusted and just hurt that they gave up their undergraduate years and their study to something like, not that this is a terrible degree, right? But what's the degree? Family studies or something like that. That's a fine degree. I'm not bashing the degree at all, but a lot of women go and get that because that's what they think the church wants them to do, right?
Right. Of course.
And they'd much rather really be studying something else. And then when they leave the church and they want to have a career, or even when they're in the church, there are many. I don't want to mischaracterize women within the church. There are many feminist and progressive women within the church that also are very hurt. And when they realize that that they could have had it a lot better had they studied a different degree or was something that they wanted to or had developed a different skill set. I mean, it's just disgusting to me. It really is.
Absolutely. The more women getting family living degrees and MRS degrees, the less women that are actually going into STEM and vocational degrees that will be able to contribute to like the broader professional society in Utah alone, and even speaking on a broad sense, it's a self-perpetuating cycle. You said it perfectly, Ethan.
Yep.
All right. What is the fourth leak that you're wanting the third leak that you're wanting to discuss today?
Yeah. So I think this was. I've heard very little argument that this was not our top leak of the week, and that was the emails and the financials that we released that showed that money had been leaving a certain ward in Holland into a bishop's bank account.
Yeah, this is wow. This is something else right here.
Yeah, it was. I was just before coming on, I was rereading the emails and I was like, oh man, this is crazy.
Would you like to share any extracts that you found particularly tantalizing?
I mean, I have a hard time. We've gotten I will recognize that we have gotten a bit of pushback from people that know this bishop or something, right, coming to his defense. And so I want to recognize that there are probably parts of the story that we don't know. However, the documents that we have released are pretty damning. But apparently, I mean, this guy, he's been living off the church for a while and none of his spending habits have changed, right? And yeah, I mean, it's sad that this happens. To me, I mean, so I served my mission in Guatemala.
Okay.
And it's and I don't have any proof of this, so take my word for it. And just because I'm a member of Mormon Leaks doesn't mean that I have documentation proving this. But this sort of thing happens in Latin America fairly often as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's at least from what I've heard and from what I saw on my mission, right? I guess I shouldn't speak for all of Latin America. It happened in Guatemala fairly regularly.
Okay.
And it's disgusting to me because, I mean, I taught people and baptized families that were living in a one-room tin shack with a dirt floor, right? And I always hated asking them to pay tithing. But at the same time, in the weird missionary way, I was excited for them because I was convinced that it would bring them blessings, that it would make their life better and everything. Anyway, it was always a hard lesson for me. And to think about those people who can barely put a can of beans on the table every day for their family, paying tithing, and then it going to pay some bishop or stake president or somebody somewhere that doesn't need it nearly as bad as they do. I mean, it's super fucked up, and it really pisses me off.
Well, and I'm just looking at a line item here, possibly from an area that might be slightly impoverished or whatever the case may be. Here's a line. A simple calculation tells us he has received 48 times of 4,400 euros, which totals 212,000 euros. This amount is not acceptable in my view. And that's a direct translation from the email. So, I mean, obviously, if there is indeed embezzlement going on here, it's not pennies. He's not taking, just a couple pennies from the coffers. And if this is a systematic problem, it's on the church itself to plug up the holes, but also there's definitely a moral conundrum going on here. When we have people like yourself, Ethan, taking money from people who are, sleeping on dirt and don't have furniture, and they can only afford, some rice or a can of beans for food for their family. And the church is still trying to get them to pay their tithing. And then we have, the middle management bishops who might be stuffing their pockets with this. I think that is a very, confusing moral conundrum to try and deal with. I mean, wow.
Oh, yeah. One of my go-to quotes when I talk to people about tithing is a hot button issue for me, if you haven't noticed by now on this segment of the show. But One quote that I go to often is, it was a General Conference quote. I can't remember the year, but I could send you the link if you'd like. But he says, even if it means not being able to feed your family, pay your tithing first.
Of course. Yep.
And as a TBM, in fact, I probably did hear that as a TBM in conference and think that was totally fine and probably inspiring, right?
Half of their lessons are about paying tithing, regardless of whatever, crazy circumstance you find yourself in. Oh, your car broke down, pay your tithing. Something will fix it, It's a very damaging thing to teach.
Right. And then when, like I said, I don't have any proof that this is a rampant problem in any area of the world in the church, but I personally have little doubt that it is.
Yeah.
And it's disgusting. It's terrible, and it needs to stop, and it needs to be exposed.
Absolutely. And such is the entire mission statement of Mormon Leaks. So, Ethan, thank you so much for joining me today and for your commitment to transparency. I'm aware that Mormon Leaks is currently amidst a fundraising campaign, and I know that recently that you have gone back and forth with the Bruce McConkie Foundation with the leaks that were published. Recently, you guys have dumped another one. Do you want to plug the fundraising campaign that you guys are doing right now as well?
Yeah, so we are doing a donation drive. We had a goal to raise $15,000 in 1 week. We knew that was a lofty goal going into it.
Yeah, of course.
Right now, last I looked, we were sitting at about $4,100, which will keep us going for 1 to 2 years. So honestly, we are thrilled with that amount. We really are. 15 grand would have kept us going for about 5, maybe even up to 7 years.
Okay.
But honestly, we're thrilled with the amount we got. We also put a lofty goal because we're trying to gain 501c3 status, and that's going to be fairly costful. However, we were approached by somebody that's willing to do it pro bono, so that is well worth it as well. So
awesome! Glad to hear that, and I'm glad that you guys didn't hit the goal. It's still I'm glad to hear that there was some success and that people do definitely see value in the mission of Mormon Leaks, and people do want to see this effort perpetuated and the commitment to creating more transparency and more dialogue about the church's clandestine efforts. So, all in all, Ethan, I want to say thank you so much for your transparency, for coming out, and for being very calculating with how you came out and the proper timing. I'm really glad to be talking to Ethan instead of Privacy P. Pratt, whose name and face I don't know. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was fun.
All right, that's going to do it for our Mormon Leaks Minute. Once again, huge thanks to Ethan Dosh for coming on and sharing his story, as well as talking about some of the leaks. For any subscribers on patreon.com/nakedmormonism, this week's special Patreon episode is the recording from the NAMO home evening that we had earlier this last weekend. And that was, we had Ethan as well as Ryan, the Mormon Leaks duo, on to talk about some Reddit controversy that's been going on, as well as we dove way into the weeds on some of these leaks and read quotes from them and got quite a bit deeper of a dive than Ethan and I did in this. So if you are a subscriber, be sure to check that out. I think you'll really enjoy that. I sure enjoyed recording with them and had on a few other people from other podcasts, a few other friends, as well as Alice and, Joey and Andrew from Pulpit Podcast. We had a few people join up, so it was a really fun hangout. Check your Patreon feed for that episode. With that, let's thank our newest patrons of the show. We have to catch up on a few of them here. So we have Jonathan, Rick, Sean Anderson, Silly Rabbits Podcast, my good friend Cody, Pascal Van de Berg. I'm sure that's some kind of highbrow reference to Pascal. Adam and Sarah, as well as a pledge edit from Patriarchal Grip Brandon. I love that. What is this? Thank you so much to all of the newest patrons who have pledged to support the show at patreon.com/nakedmormonism. I hope you enjoy all of the extra content that you get over on that feed, as well as the ad-free edition of the show. If you don't want to listen to ads, go and sign up at patreon.com/nakedmormonism. As little as $1 an episode, you can get access to that exclusive feed. We also had a one-time donation through PayPal from Jeffrey. So, Jeffrey, thank you so much for that. And also, I have to offer a very belated thanks to my very good friend, Jay Mumford, who has been with the podcast from pretty much the beginning. He's sent me a number of publications. He just signed me up for the Sunstone publication, and now I'm looking forward to getting my first issue of that in the mail in this coming week here. But also, Jay was the amazing person who sent me the book, The Sword of Laban, and that was written by Bill Moraine. We did a book report on that a couple episodes back, so I wanted to give a huge shout out and thanks to Jay for really helping out and for sticking around since the beginning. It's really, really nice of you. Thank you, Jay. All right, it's finally time to talk about Mythicist Milwaukee and the Myth Information Conference of 2017. Whenever I'm listening to atheist and skeptic podcasts and they say, I normally don't get into drama of the podcasting world, but as soon as I hear but, I skip. I skip to the next episode, or I skip the next few minutes. So that's why I'm including this at the end of the episode. For those of you who don't care, or don't want to know about this, or have already heard what everybody said about the Myth Information Conference, you can just skip because there's nothing else in this episode. This is all that I'm going to talk about until the end. And I just want to be very brief in my comments about it. I was struck by seeing this quote by Mark Twain, and he wrote this in Innocents Abroad. He said, quote, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." End quote. The reason why that quote struck me is I enjoy traveling so much. You know, for the John Whitmer Historical Conference in Nauvoo and the Mythcon in Milwaukee the following weekend after that, I just drove there from Seattle, and I really enjoy traveling. I enjoy meeting people and seeing places I've never seen before. Even driving across the flyover country, I enjoy seeing beautiful sights, and it's really incredible to meet so many people that I otherwise never would have met at conferences like this. John Whitmer Conference was an example of an amazing conference with people of differing views who are able to come together and academically have disagreements and hash out those disagreements and then go home and continue to foster and cherish those relationships that are built at the John Whitmer Conference. In stark contrast to how good the John Whitmer Conference was, Myth Information stood out to me as I think a bit of a blight on the atheist and skeptical community for a couple of reasons. And I wanted to bring up this quote from Samuel Clemens because this conference happened just, the day before the mass shooting in Las Vegas from the Mandalay Hotel at the country music festival there. And it took me realizing this and seeing these two occurrences happen so close together that as much as I can travel and I can meet new people and I have a very optimistic outlook on the world, hate and evil still exist. And it's a really disturbing concept in my mind because I am at my heart an optimist, and I really don't like to see people suffering or see bad ideas propagated or people committing atrocities and not having to pay for said atrocities. As much as I enjoy altruism and I think that it's a good and wholesome ideal to chase, I also think that justice is as well. And people being responsible for what they say and what they do and having to suffer the consequences for that. The reason this conference was so controversial is because there were some YouTubers who were invited and given a platform that a lot of people don't agree with. And the debate between Thomas Smith, a friend of the show Thomas Smith, who hosts Serious Inquiries Only and Opening Arguments, he was pitted against a YouTube personality that goes by the screen name Sargon of Akkad. Carl Benjamin is the guy's name. Carl Benjamin has said some very deplorable and inhuman things to people who don't deserve it. And in all of the interactions that I have seen played out, it seems like he is just a troll. But unfortunately, hatred and vitriol sells. You know, and I've done this a little bit in the earliest episodes of the show. That's when I was very hateful and vitriolic about the church as I was learning all of these things. And you can see my trajectory charted throughout the evolution of the episodes. I began with hatred and anger, but that only fueled me for so long. Now I'm just fueled by pure intellectual fascination, which is an endless well of stamina for chasing more knowledge. But people gravitate towards hatred. And people like Sargon of Akkad, they're a very polarizing individual. And along with, polarity this way comes a magnetizing effect. You know, if a person like Carl is so magnetic to certain people, he's going to be equally disgusting to other people for what he does. But unfortunately, what we saw represented at the Myth Information Conference was a large following of his, and that magnetism of this polar magnetism that he was able to draw was played out in the crowd at large. And the atheist and skeptical podcasting movement, who should have been there to support Thomas Smith, ripped themselves to shred over the controversy of this guy. I'm not going to play any clips from it. You can search Sargon of Akkad and Thomas Smith. You can search Myth Information Conference. You will see everybody talking about this, and everybody has said far more articulate and informed things than I have about this. So I don't have any comments to give on the debate or on the performance of the individuals included. But I do want to add my 2 cents about Myth Information Conference itself. I've considered the organizers of the conference to be friends for quite some time. They've been on this podcast. I've been on their podcast. There's a video on YouTube with the 360 video when we recorded in their studio in Milwaukee, of me talking with the organizers there, and they're really cool guys. I really enjoyed their company, and for some reason, this shift in their organizational efforts, I think, really revealed the true colors of who these people are. And it seems to me that they are opportunistic, and they will do what is necessary in order to sell tickets to the Myth Information Conference. I can't fault them for that, because as organizers of conference, it is incumbent upon you to make the conference a success. And one of the measures of success for a conference is the level of attendance. Unfortunately, the mechanism by which they increased attendance was controversy and vitriol. And that's not sustainable. This year, Myth Information Conference was well attended. They filled the bottom floor of the Pabst Theater, which is apparently quite a challenge to do. There were 400 attendees, which is, on the scale of conferences, that was pretty significant. That was quite a few people. And I don't think that they're going to have as much attendance next year, because I'm of the opinion that they successfully burned every bridge with the atheist and skeptical community. Go listen to Serious Inquiries Only and hear Thomas's take on what the conference was about and on his own performance of the conference, because he really elucidates that all of these huge names in the atheist and skeptical movement they have no interest in affiliating with the Myth Information Conference, especially the ones who dropped out before the conference, who said that they were going to attend, but once they learned of the speakers list and they learned of this controversy, they dropped out before the conference happened. So those people will never be attending the conference. And for all of these same reasons, I'm going to keep my eye on the speakers list for next year. But now that the dust has settled and Myth Information, or the Mythicist Milwaukee organizers have had a chance to analyze and to come out with public statements discussing what happened, they have only entrenched themselves further into this group of people who everybody is now calling shitlords. And what's insane about this is these group of people are embracing that term. they are of the opinion that if everybody's going to call them shitlords, then we're going to use that as a label for ourselves to describe who we are. And I cannot conscionably think of a person or a personality type who would be happy to wear the label of shitlord. Are you fucking kidding me? These are the people that are going to be attending Myth Information Conference next year, because I don't think that the organizers are going to make a major shift. I have it on good authority that a number of the organizers have quit in protest or have been let go of the conference, of the Mythicist Milwaukee team in protest of what happened at this year's conference. And I say good for them. Your actions speak louder than any words that you could say in any meeting. And the Myth Information and Mythicist Milwaukee organizers are going to have to forge their path without you guys. And I think that's good. I say let them. And if this is how they want their conferences to be from now on, if Myth Information Conference is just going to be the premier American shitlord conference, I say that's on them. That's incumbent upon them, and that's their prerogative to make a conference and harbor these same types of people. I just don't plan on attending. But like I said, I'm going to keep my eye on the speakers list and the guest list for next year. If it is a conference that they have made reparations and that they try and shift away from this current path, then I'm happy to attend and I am happy to endorse it. I endorsed it previously before the conference happened. I endorsed it when I was talking to Thomas Cecil in Chicago in Glory Hole Studios. And I said, I'm excited for the conference, regardless of the controversy surrounding it. And I'm happy to endorse it if I feel like the conference is endorsable. But at its current state, I cannot. And I'll just say that on a personal level, I really wish that I would have attended the God Awful Movies in Salt Lake City. That was the same weekend as opposed to the Myth Information Conference for a number of reasons. It would have been really cool to hang out with the GAM crew as well as the Thank God I'm Atheist guys around Salt Lake City and tour the Gilgal Gardens and tour Temple Square. It would have been really awesome. But unfortunately, the scheduling conflict did not allow for both of those to happen, and I had to make a choice. And I feel like in some ways I made the wrong choice. I wish I would have been hanging out with friends instead of lost in a crowd of people who were cheering on a couched threat of rape of somebody who was a victim or a survivor, I should say, of sexual assault, and who was, you can look up the video for yourself. It's a mess. But also, with that said, I did attend it with some friends. There was Jenica Crail, there was my friend Sharon Frankel, Deb, Heretic Woman. There were these few people, James Van Heel, that I met there, who I know is a listener of my Book of Mormon. It was good to meet you, Jim, in person. Your beard is absolutely glorious. I'm envious. It was fun to hang out with these people, but we were not among a crowd of friends. We were definitely a minority, and the crowd was cheering for Sargon, and any cheers that we were giving for Thomas in protest of what the Sargon crowd was saying were completely drowned out by boos from the Sargon crowd. So, I mean, it would have been cool to attend a conference or an event like God Awful Movies where everybody's on the same page and laughing and enjoying each other's company, instead of seeing this vicious polarity and disagreement harbored in the ranks of the audience. So, it was fun to hang out with the friends there. I'm glad that I was there to support Thomas, because I feel like I was one of very few people who were there to support him. And I wish that more people would have attended Myth Information from the podcasting side of atheism and skepticism instead of the YouTube quote unquote shitlord side, in order to support Thomas, because I feel like it was a valuable conversation if it were set up properly. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and it was set up as just a yelling match and cheap shots. It wasn't a debate. It was a debacle. It was an utter travesty. So that's all I want to say about Myth Information Conference. Look up the videos for yourself if you care to dive deeper into this and look into it. I don't want to belabor the listeners with any more of this drama and controversy, because I think it is valueless and stupid, and it only serves to divide a community who was already so far divided because of so many disagreements. And we're not going to get any further in society if we are doing exactly what everybody outside of our movement wants us to do, and that is tear ourselves apart. This was not a good example of what atheism and skepticism can be. So that's my Forrest Gump. That's all I have to say about that. Let's close up the episode. I'm sorry to end on a somber note, but that's kind of one thing that I wanted to talk about, and what's been weighing on me heavily is seeing this vitriol and hate writ large in the world and coming so deeply into conflict of my eternal optimistic perspective of everything. So here we are. This is the world we live in. But I need to thank the few people who keep the show going on the back end, and it really keep me waking up every morning. So thank you so much to Julie, who does the Twitter and Facebook pages. She is our social media guru. Thank you so much, Julie. And thank you to Jason Camo for providing the music used in the show with his permission. That's going into your ear canal right now. Go to aloststateofmind.com to see more of his music there. Download it, listen to it. He makes some amazing stuff. Thank you to Craig Keeling for providing the artwork used in the show with his permission. Go to weirdmormonshit.com to see his blog there. Thank you to Andrew Torres of the law offices of P. Andrew Torres, as well as the Opening Arguments podcast, for providing legal services employed by Ground Gnome Studios. Thank you, Andrew. Also, thank you so much to all of you listeners for hanging in there with me all the way to the end of the show. I know you hate drama just as much as me, but sometimes we have to talk about it. And there's that but again, so go ahead and skip past the rest. So, of course, thank you so much once again to the patrons who support the show at patreon.com/nakedmormonism and get all the extra content in the Patreon feed there. And it's necessary to thank the most important people who keep this all running, the listeners. You're the ones who hit download. You're the ones who listen every week to my musings, to my research, and whose love I cannot express enough gratitude for. Thank you, thank you, thank you once again for lending me your ear. Hope to talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast.
As one who has looked to the builders of the Nauvoo temple for strength, it is my privilege to speak of the Nauvoo temple then and now. For the building of the Nauvoo temple is a saga, a legacy, a story of devotion and sacrifice. It needs to be told, though it may never be fully understood. For how can you or I comprehend that we stand on the accomplishments of great men and women, those whose hearts were true and whose deeds of yesteryear memorialize their devotion to God? The temple is also a story of today, a rebuilding, a rededication, a renewal of hope that we can look to God for answers and in those answers obtain eternal joy. The story begins on the 19th of January, 1841.
The preceding podcast is a production of Ground Gnomes LLC, copyright 2017, all rights reserved.